we think that regardless of subject focus, language and communication skills are key to improving learning. And what we'll explore is the receptive skills, so the reading, the viewing, the listening, and the productive skills, so writing, speaking, and presenting, that could be developed through thematic units. So first of all, I'll give you some kind of context just so you know where we're coming from. We have a series of thematic units, and this is just a selection of them. We organise them into 3 age ranges so that they cover all the primary years from 5 to 11 years old, lots of different things. We don't actually have language arts as a driver for any of these units. We do have some things on myths and legends, but that then focuses more on the historical side. So these are the 10 subjects that are focused on within our units. Some units have all of these subjects in, and some units just have 1 or 2 of them. And we do now actually have some single subject focused units where we have specific ones for art or for music and for PE as well to support our single subject teachers. So we do have learning goals for all of these. We also have learning goals for maths, language arts as well. And within our units, we do provide opportunities for ICT and computing, language arts and maths to be integrated. And obviously I'll be focusing on how we do language arts today. So the starting point when I was asked to do this presentation was to think about integration. And in the dictionary, it says to combine 2 or more things in order to become more effective. So one of the things we need to think about is when we're looking for opportunities, it's not just about going, oh, look, there's an opportunity and doing it. That might be the first thing we do. But then we need as teachers to reflect on that and say, was that an effective combination of subject learning and language learning? So we're going to think about some of the areas where we think that the language can come in. And I know that teachers around the world will have different, perhaps language arts programs, but they're likely to include all of these 3 elements. So hopefully some of the examples I give will kind of be an inspiration for you to think about your own context for your subject learning, whether it be thematic or even if it be specific subject learning, as well as thinking about how your language program, how it might align and how you might be able to make some of those integrations a positive experience for your learners. The idea being that we can think about, okay, when we're trying to find out more about the world, we might do a science experiment, we might do some research online. So what kinds of literacy skills will we need to do this? And then when we think about productive literacy skills, we often ask for responses in subjects, but we don't necessarily offer the guidance to say, remember the skills that you learn in your English lesson. How will they help you here? Show me what you know about something. So hopefully there'll be some things there that show you how you can bring different parts of the curriculum together. So in the IPC, we really concentrate on knowledge, skills and understanding. So we have this idea of knowledge, which would be remembering things, developing skills, which are progressive. And we don't say there's a finish point, they just keep going. And then we also have the idea of developing a breadth and depth of understanding. So I'm going to focus on a little bit of knowledge, but then the main part will be about those literacy skills. So very briefly, vocabulary for us is a knowledge thing. This means you need to remember it. So when you're thinking about learning new words and things like this, you have to be able to remember them to be able to use them. And this is a bit of research that came from Hirsch, which says, you know, it's something that happens slowly. We know that in the beginning years of the life that there are lots of opportunities to really get vocabulary. But when we start to think about academic vocabulary, then we have to start thinking about how can we really help that development happen. So he offered a key insight that if you actually put the word in a context, so the idea is that you're not trying to separate it and say, here's your list of science words that you're going to need for the upcoming unit. What he's saying is that it needs to be in that context. And what we think about is that for learning to happen, you need to make connections. So for us, we would always try and make sure that there are opportunities to learn and to use words that are subject focused, but actually help us further the way that we talk about learning and the way that we understand learning in those subjects. So we do recommend explaining a few critical words, but they need to be done in the context. So we provide a glossary. So this is one of the new things that's part of our units, because we had lots of questions from schools about, well, how do I know which terminology the children need to be using? So we provide a glossary and we try and keep it focused, because it should support the subject language learning so that they can use the correct terminology, but it's really so that it develops those communication skills. So learners can talk about what they have learned. They can ask questions about what they have learned and maybe what they want to learn more about. So if they have the words, they'll be able to communicate better, talk to each other, talk to the teacher, and they should be then seeing, hearing and using these words regularly, so that they then become part of their long-term memory. So if they do a science unit towards the beginning of the year, maybe they return to it towards the end of the year and look at some of the similar themes. Hopefully, because they've had such a broad base of experience with that vocabulary, it will be in their long-term memory and they'll be able to retrieve it and use it again. So this is a very simple start. Vocabulary is kind of one of the building blocks for what we use for language, but it doesn't require those skills that take long-term development. This is something that you have to remember it, you have to know about it, but what we're going to think about next is what we might do with things. So the IPC has a process to facilitate learning. There are opportunities for communication at all of these times. They require language, talking about things and doing things. However, we're going to focus on what we call our mini cycle of research, record and reflect. What happens in our units is these things are revisited time and time again. And I'm sure that you can think about what happens in your own subject or thematic learning, where you might, instead of research, you might be doing inquiry, then you might be doing processing, and then you might be reflecting and moving forward. So hopefully some of the terminology is transferable and you can see how to use it in your own situation. So for research, I'll be connecting to those receptive skills, listening, viewing and reading. How do we get the information? However, receptive skills have to go beyond just getting the information. You have to understand the information that's being consumed so that you can do something with it. So then we have the record side of things, which are more of those productive language skills. So the speaking, the presenting and the writing, and the emphasis on these may change depending on the level of language that the child has. It might change by age, but there should always be opportunities for all three of these things happening for everybody. So it goes beyond just that, you know, can I communicate? It's really got to be about that communicating effectively. Does somebody else know what I'm learning about? So we provide lots of opportunities where maybe a piece of writing is presented in a gallery, or they have to read the piece of writing, maybe they send a letter to somebody. The same with the presenting. We try and think of ways that there can be an audience for, say, the video that they've created, so that then it gives it that stronger purpose and makes it more meaningful. Now, reflection for us does have many facets, but for the purposes of this presentation, I don't think it's the best context for developing those skills that we'll be having a look at. Yes, definitely based on communication skills. We don't want reflection to just be internal. We want it to be externalized so people can talk about it and think about where they'll be moving on to. But for the purposes of this, we'll focus on the research and record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few examples that have come from our units, but hopefully they're things that you can kind of look at and go, oh yeah, I've used a technique similar to that. This is how I could develop it. Or I think there's an opportunity for that kind of learning to be embedded either within the subject or to be practiced within an English class and then taken into your subject or thematic learning. So hopefully everybody can make meaning. So the first one, our receptive literacy skills, we'll look at viewing. So this is an example of a language arts goal from the IPC, be able to summarize and retell what they have viewed. There are probably similar ones in your own program. Sometimes they also put it under digital literacy skills as well. So that idea of when we look online, what kinds of things we look at, the different kinds of visual text and things. So for us, when we talk about text, we try and think about it in the broadest sense. So The main focus of the task that we're looking at, remember, is the subject that's embedded within the thematic unit. These language arts learning goals are something that we hope would happen through the process. So you may have needed to teach some of the strategies and things first, and then you can transfer and apply them to this situation. Whereas in other times you might think, okay, actually, this is a good place to actually teach this because it brings more meaning to it. So with the first one, videos have become quite commonplace in the classroom as a way of presenting information. We know that the learners that we have consume massive amounts, whether it be from YouTube or whether it be from their own kind of streaming services and things. So I want you to think about, do we actually teach children to consume what they're viewing, to actually process it and really do something with it? Because we sometimes expect, okay, children watch lots of TV, they must be able to watch a video and get the most from it. So I want you to imagine that you're with your class and you're watching a video on the life of Columbus or a significant person that you study from history. Now, often what happens is you watch the video, you talk about it, and this is largely a teacher-led activity. I'm going to share a couple of examples of how you can shift that focus. You put the responsibility more on the learners, and also learning a skill then for how they can consume other things that they view and hopefully be more thoughtful consumers. So the first one might be, you have a group, you set up your group of 4 and assign A, B, C, and D to the group, and person A, as they watch and listen to the video, is going to note down any dates. Person B will think about places, person C will think about the people involved, and person D would think about the events. The idea is that then you're bringing a focus to things, so the children aren't trying to remember everything, because on a single viewing, the chances are that they won't. So as each child makes their notes, they could do it in pictures, they could do it in words, we could have numbers, they can make their notes, and then at the end of the session, they can reconvene, share what they heard and what they saw, and then you may want to watch the video again to see if they can then make more sense of the story. But by doing this, you're teaching them a strategy that they might need to watch something more than once to make the most sense of it. They might need to choose what the focus is. If it's history, dates might be important. If it's geography, places might be important, but you can help them then actually develop their own strategies for consuming information. And a second example might be that you make pairs, and one person in the pair faces the video. One person can actually not look at the video at all and just concentrate on what is being said. So listening to the voiceover, the conversations, what the characters might be doing, because it could be a kind of an animation telling the same kind of story from Columbus. So the idea here is that what would happen is, the pairs, they focus on their thing, either what is being said or what is being seen. At the end, they make their notes, they can draw pictures, they can use words, but they should note it down in their own way. Then they can swap roles. So you show the video again, and this time the person who was listening focuses on what's being seen. So here then they have the opportunity to bring their two senses together of listening and seeing to try and make more sense of their information. They can then combine their notes together and swap their ideas. And this then also introduces the idea of cross-referencing, checking in with someone. Did we both hear the same thing? Did we see the same thing? Because a single watching of a video, you can get sort of interpretations that are maybe not the correct ones. People maybe don't focus on the most important information. They focus on what the person was wearing rather than the place they went, for example. So that gives an opportunity for the children to combine their thinking and really then try and look at their new knowledge about the story that was being told. So another example, reading. You might have structures that you follow for reading classes. You might be doing guided reading so many times a week. You might have some comprehension strategies that are required at different levels within the school. The idea is that I want to tell you how you can use some of those and apply them within your subject learning. So these again are just some examples of language arts goals. I'm sure you've got very similar ones. So these come from what we call Milepost 2, which is kind of our 8-year-olds. And you've probably got similar ones from the beginning, the middle, and the end of your own programs to think about. So we have a lot of reading comprehension lessons within schools, but one of the things we need to think about is how we can create more meaning for that by teaching children that they need to use those techniques in other situations. So here's the first example. Inferring is quite a complex reading comprehension thing. It's going deeper, it's looking at the clues. And one of the things that we thought about is how the things that we read can actually provide a context for understanding things about the world. So this one comes from our Olympics unit. And if we think about it, how the role of women changed throughout the 20th century, how dress codes changed, whether they could go to work, this is reflected in some of the events, the Olympics being one of them, the shift in changes during wartime for the roles that maybe men and women had in the home and things like that. So by providing something to read that's actually just within the context of your learning, for example, about the Olympics, you can go deeper and actually start to infer things maybe about the societal changes at the time. So this gives an example of actually how to use that skill of inferring to go deeper and to find out more about a subject area. This is another comprehension strategy, determining importance. When you teach very exciting things that are all shiny and fun, and they have foods in and they have flags in and there's fireworks and things like this, often we find that when we talk to children, the bits that they remember are not necessarily the most important bits that we want them to remember from the reading. So they read a story and maybe it's a story of Diwali, and they kind of go, oh yes, they lit candles, they had new dresses, they exchanged clothes. And while these social elements are important, we had a look at how we could try and shift the focus to determining the importance of what actually led to that celebration taking place. So one of our activities is that the children read picture books that describe how children celebrate social and religious events. And what we want them to find the important bits are the things that actually connected to the origin event. So they'll have talked about the origin event beforehand, they might have watched a video, they might have listened to it, they might have interviewed somebody, but they know where that event has come from, but now they've got to start building those connections. And again, as we've said, that building connections is one of the important things for learning. So hopefully through this, the children will research and really get those important nuggets to do with the basis for the event, rather than just the fun bits that we know that they often want to concentrate on. And this is our final comprehension strategy one. Another strategy we know some schools use is the idea of connecting. So connecting text to self, text to text, and text to world. We found that this kind of approach would work well with what we call our Sustainable Development Challenge series. So this is around the Sustainable Development Goals, and it challenges children to think about themselves and the world and why these particular goals are significant to the world. So when we look at this, we can have children think about their own relationship with water. Do they have a consistent supply of water? Is their supply of water clean? So they can actually be thinking about themselves and then thinking, okay, well, how do I find out about other people? How do I think about what this means to the world? And in actually reading some of the resources provided by the UN around these Sustainable Development Goals, they can start to build up a picture of other people's relationships. And that might, depending where you are, that might be, oh, these people seem to waste a lot of water. These people seem to be inundated with water. Maybe they're in a flood area. So there are very different perspectives they might pull out from reading other people's stories and case studies. And then the third thing is the idea of sort of that using other kinds of text. So we think this is a good opportunity to bring in news stories. So then it's that idea of connecting the text that they've been reading around the issues of the sustainable development of clean water and sanitation, and how those issues are still evident in the world today. And this provides a really good opportunity for teachers to bring things up to date, to make things local, because then that strengthens the connections that children make to their learning, because they're going, oh, this is about me. This is a story that's near me, or this is a place that I know, or a place that I visited, or this was yesterday. And it then makes, hopefully, their learning more meaningful. And finally, on the receptive skills is the listening, and this idea of, we tell children that they need to listen all the time. We're often saying, you must listen, but it's whether we can actually teach them to be better listeners. So it might be, again, using similar kinds of comprehension skills, that idea of, as Kate mentioned, the idea of being physical and actually engaging and responding to things, because we know that that helps learning. So this is a simple idea that can be applied to any story that you're looking at. So you might have a story that you think is a bit dry and you're not sure how to make it interesting for the children. And you can have this kind of active theatre approach to it. So you can assign a movement, a noise, something that needs to be done when each of these things happen in the story. And by doing that, you're getting the children involved, and they should have a better memory of the things that happened in the story, so that that furthers their learning. So for example, in this case, it's more about kind of social learning. This was taken from a story where when Edward Jenner developed the smallpox vaccine. That's quite something that's quite difficult for a child to understand. You know, yes, this year they've heard a lot more about vaccines. It's perhaps making a little bit more sense to them, but by bringing these elements in, we would hope the children had have a better understanding of the story afterwards, and they'd be able to talk about it because they'll remember parts of it. So we'll now quickly move on to productive literacy, and hopefully you can sort of recognize some of the elements again and think about how you transfer your English language learning into the other places. So we've been particularly focused on developing some resources around this, so that cover our fiction, non-fiction, poetry, media. So we actually now have text type guides, and we've actually been working on connecting those to our thematic learning. So if they're actually doing something within science, within geography, there might actually be a text type guide that is useful, and that then provides a hint for the teacher to think, okay, what do I need to pre-teach, and then what can I then use in my thematic learning? So this is a very simple example. It's very structured, it's very scaffolded. So if we think about creating your own history museum in your classroom, maybe in this case, it's a toy museum where people bring in a toy, and instead of presenting it and talking about it, we're going to say, okay, we're going to set it up as a museum, and we need to know what kinds of things we need to say about it. So you can look at a real museum, what kinds of things are included, the name of the item, it might be where it was made, what it was made of. You decide on those and then just provide the structure. So this is a very simple, scaffolded kind of thing, but there are a lot more complex text that also can be used and embedded into that kind of recording and using our literacy skills then for subject. So have a think about all the different types of text that you can think of, and then in your mind kind of think, do you think of these as just English tools, or do you think of them as subject learning tools? So this is just a selection that we've come up with, all different things, and I'm going to pull out a couple of these and show you how we think they go beyond English and they can become part of other learning. So this is an example from one of our units where they've been looking at their local history. So one of the things they've done is they've learned about local people, how they're celebrating the locality. Do they have streets named after them? Are there commemorative plaques and things in different places? And then their challenge at the end is kind of to try and summarize this, so to show their history learning and to work individually to or in pairs to create a local history book. Now, one of the challenges that we find with writing is that children need to know the order they need to write in, because the type of text often drives that. So there's lots of non-chronological reports, lots of styles of doing it. Sometimes it might be sequenced by first, second, third, fourth to do with the time that something happened. In this case, the challenge for the children is to think about actually using the context of a walk around the locality to put their little pieces of writing in. So they're writing to describe and explain. The purpose is very important. The context is that local history guide that you could give to someone so that they could walk around. And then the content comes from, they could choose, they might focus on transport changes, shopping, those people that have lived in the local area and things like that. But the important thing is, I think that we need to tell the children, look, you've learned non-chronological report writing. We know what it's all about. Now we're going to take it out of our English lessons and we're going to use it in a meaningful way. And this one is from our Freeze It unit, and Freeze It focuses on science and geography. So it thinks about how things get cold, what are they like, but also places that are cold. So in this case, the idea is that they write a non-fiction travel guide. It's kind of a different kind of report. It's describing again, but this time it's describing places. So thinking about what they look like, what the weather is like there. And we've sort of kind of given a suggestion that they add in a don't forget to pack list. So it kind of makes it a bit more interesting. That provides you the opportunity then for a little bit more creativity. Even though it's non-fiction, what other kinds of things could be included that tell us about those places? And by using these kinds of structures and really giving them the purpose, hopefully again the children can transfer those literacy skills to a meaningful place. This one is probably one that I'm sure has come up in most classrooms around the world. Even though we know that the games that children might create now might be online games, they might be apps rather than necessarily the board games that we used to make, games need instructions. So the purpose to explain how to do something, but we've given a meaningful context where the child is the only one that knows what the instructions are and the rules of play are, which means they have to bring their communication skills, their literacy skills to explain it to other people. The other thing that we recommend with this is the chance to test. So if we think about you write, you test, you edit, this provides a really good opportunity for observing, can children use our instructions? Do they get a sense of those rules of the play? And if not, what changes do I need to make? Which brings a very, very meaningful writing and editing process, which can often be challenging when children don't want to edit and redo something again. And our final one, so this one is more focusing on the fictional, so thinking about a poem that describes an experience. Now, in this case, we don't say which type of poem it should be. If you've been looking in your class at haiku, then you could use haiku to describe the experience. In this case, it's following on from an art lesson where they thought about the signs and sounds of a firework display and tried to recreate that in art. If you've been looking at an acrostic, you could have different names of fireworks and do an acrostic. The point is that it's that other way of looking at the creativity around, I can create art that shows what I think about and know about and have experienced with fireworks, or I can use words to do it as well. So it's just providing those different kinds of opportunities, and it kind of helps different children be successful because they can see themselves in these kinds of activities. If they're particularly artistic, they might have enjoyed the art lesson. If they like playing with words, they might prefer doing it through poetry. Now, one of the points to think about, and I hope that some of those examples kind of resonated with you and think, oh yeah, that's actually easier than I think. Do remember that we're trying to look for effective integration. So you might start playing with your integrations and things like this, but for it to be effective, it needs to be planned, it needs to be thought out. And one of the things you need to plan is the assessment considerations. Sometimes as teachers, we present an activity to children, we say, okay, so we're going to write our travel guide about our snowy place, and we're not clear on the most important expectations. Is the most important expectation that they create a good travel guide, that it has pictures in it, that it has captions, that they address these 5 issues as they go through their sequence of writing? Or is the most important thing that they understand and show us that they understand what activities, what the weather is like, how things change for people when they're trying to live or spend time in a snowy place? So is it that geography subject that we're looking at, or is it the literacy that we're looking at? And we shouldn't do both. That's too much for children. We need to be able to be clear and say, this is my expectation. I'm really looking for, and we can decide, are we really looking for that transference of those literacy skills from English, or are we really looking for, show me what you know and understand about geography? And you can make those decisions and use different opportunities, but look for the most effective ones. One final thought, I know that this is going out and most teachers teach English and you've been encouraged to share it in your schools, but have a think about the other languages, the languages that maybe children use at home. Could they be used as part of research? Think about how additional language or host country language is taught in your school. Are there ways where they could actually integrate with the subject learning that's been happening? Could they be developing their vocabulary and then trying to apply that? For example, they might write a poetry in one of the other languages that they study. So don't just think about it from an English thing. If you can think about how to feed this forward to other teachers in your school, it might provoke some thinking for them as well. And it gives value to those other languages that the children are learning or that they have in their homes. So this is just a final slide. So if you want to find out more about us, or if you have any questions, you can follow us in all of these different places doing all of these different things, or you can email to over at info@fieldworkeducation.com.